Welcome back, everyone. Mr. Allen here. So I'm going to make use of this Excel spreadsheet to run through creating a histogram. This isn't necessarily something we're doing in Excel, but it kind of allows me to work with a larger amount of data and show that sort of Excel can be used or a spreadsheet can be used to help if we needed to. So basic setup here, first year algebra marks. So I have a set of marks over here of theoretically first year students algebra marks. What I need to know is sort of the range of the marks as well as the number of marks in each grouping to make my histogram. So in order to find this range, I'm going to first find the minimum value in the range, the minimum value of the marks, and basically just highlighting here with the keyboard and shift key all the way down. And so the minimum value, just the formula is really simple, equals min of that section. And then basically, similarly, I can do the same thing with the maximum. You should be able to actually just choose the columns this way as well. And the range now is sort of the number of values covered by these two values. And so essentially 79 values covered here. There's actually 80 different values because if you count the 17 and the 96, we sort of have to count them both. So there are 80 values altogether on my list here. So a reasonable sizing or class size for this grouping, probably groups of 10 here, so 17 to 26, 27 to 36, and so on, gets me a complete group. That gives me 8 nice groups of 10 values each. Now, normally if I'm doing this not on a spreadsheet, what I'll need to do next is count up the number of values in the 17 to 26 range, and then count up the number of values in the 27 to 36, and so on. With the spreadsheet, it's actually a little bit easier to go backwards and find the cumulative frequency first. So I'm just going to do that here. I'm looking to count the values in the range. So in this range again, and just highlighting with the mouse in this case, if they are less than 27. So quick little Excel / Google Sheets specific information here. As I'm typing my count if here, I put in the first range. If I hit the F4, you see it inserts these dollar signs, and the dollar signs tell it to lock that range so that I can copy and paste this formula to other locations without it changing the range of values. So I want it to stay in the B1 to I25 range. And the value that I'm trying to get to, comma here, to indicate the end of the range, and the criteria, if I'm going to be able to do this, the criteria is actually the cell underneath here, this N11. Couldn't quite get to it nicely, but that's the value I want in here. Okay, so N11 says less than 27, and basically here I'm saying look at this range of values and look for any that are less than 27. I can now copy and paste this either using copy Control-C, highlight and paste, or if you've used Excel or Google Sheets before, usually you can grab this corner and just kind of drag down and the formula will be copied to all the other cells. And you can't really see it very well, but I'll zoom in over here. But the cell now says B1 to I25 still, but you see that it's now N12 that I'm looking at, and then N13, N14, N15. So the non-locked cell, the information that does not have the dollar sign changes. The information with the dollar sign remains the same because, of course, I wanted to stay on all these same values. So last thing now is to find the actual frequencies, so the actual counts that I want to make use of. And in this case, the frequency in the first grouping is exactly the same as the cumulative frequency because this is just saying how many values are less than 27. And of course, all the values less than 27 are in the range 17 to 26 because I know 17 is my smallest value. This next grouping is actually less than 37. Less than 37. There are 10 values, but 3 of them are included in the previous group. So I basically just want to make sure I subtract those to figure out how many are just in this one grouping. So again, just sort of looking at that, there are 10 values that are less than 37. However, 3 of those values are less than 27, and so I don't want them in this group. And then similarly, this formula now can be copied and pasted into all these other spots. And when I'm looking at this one here, it's say taking the 184 and subtracting the 148 that were covered by previous groupings. And so these are the values that I want to make use of in my histogram. So I'm going to flip over here to Smart Notebook, and I'm going to draw up the histogram here. You can see the scales I've used along the x-axis here are the 17, 27, and so on that indicate 17 to 26 is my first group, and then right at 27 is where the second grouping starts. Maybe I'll make note of this at this point. Usually we look at a histogram as dealing with continuous data, and so there's no gaps. That's one of the reasons there's no gaps in the histogram diagram itself. In this case, because I'm dealing with marks, it might look like the data is not continuous, but of course, anybody who got a 75 in the course could have had something between 74.5 and 75.4. So as much as we're labeling the final grade as being an integer value, technically it wasn't probably calculated straight to an integer, so we can consider it continuous at this point. And basically my red values down here were just to help me out. They're the actual numbers I'm graphing, and so my first one here, I'm looking at, see if I can zoom this in a little bit. It's going to be too much. My first value is a 3, and so my 5's about here, so I've got a 3 kind of out to about here. My next value is a 7, so it's coming up from here and up to about here, and then across. Next value is an 8, so it's going to be just slightly above that one. And then across. And then I need a 20. Now, obviously on graph paper, or if I was actually making use of the computer to do this, I could do a little bit more accurate of a job, but you sort of get the basic idea of how this is formed. This one should be going up to 46, so somewhere in this range, and so on and so on. So across to 67. And so our final histogram looks something like this. Now, typically we do shade it in, so certainly can do that. It takes a little bit longer with Smart Notebooks, so I'm not going to bother. But hopefully that gives you the basic idea of how we go through this. Again, regardless of sort of whether we're drawing it on paper or drawing it somewhere else, we need to figure out what the frequency of each grouping is, and then that's what we're putting down on the page.